Hi, in this episode we're going to talk about how to design and laser cut these hills for your wargaming tabletop terrain. Hi, welcome to another episode of Gray Lightning, my video blog about making things and playing games. And in this episode we're going to talk about how to design in Adobe Illustrator and laser cut these hills for your wargaming terrain. I have two different styles. One is topped with a wizard circle or a summoning circle. One is topped with what I call a place of power inspired by Witcher 3. I show what it looks like when you just cut it in acrylic and leave it in a very stylized look, but also cutting it in wood and decorating it in a more traditional fashion. All of them are lit by the lights that I showed in my last episode about the terrain building. And they're simple, inexpensive, and they run off of a remote. So I'll talk about all of that in this episode. I want to use one of these lights, so the first thing I need to do is to put a virtual one into my design. So here is a scale top-down view of one of the puck lights and a side view, and based on the side view I know that I'm going to need 7 layers of 3/16 inch acrylic and 10 layers of 1/8 inch wood. I'm also planning on building a crystal for my place of power, and I'm seeing how many slices of 1/4 inch clear acrylic or 3/16 inch acrylic I need to cover the hole in the base. Here are my two hilltop designs. The summoning circle has 5 holes. Each will have a ring of stone around it, and this is the neon portal that will go inside the stone. And this is the place of power hilltop with a hole where the crystal will be covering. I'm building the hill from the top down, and I need to know what's the minimum size for the hilltop. So I put the stone rings in place and find out that a 3-inch circle is the minimum size for the top of the hill. I use my pen tool to draw a rough outline, then I convert all the anchor points to these curves with handles, and I can manipulate them any way I want to get the shape I want. I use green for reference lines on my laser, but if I want a cut line I have to make it red, so I'm going to make the outline red. And I'm going to put in another reference circle that is the size of the light well that will fit around the puck light that I'm going to put inside. So on the hilltop, I don't want to cut that. I just want to know where that is. And I can get rid of this 3-inch line because I'm not going to need that anymore. I'm going to make 2 versions of this for the 2 different hilltop designs. So how do I go about making another level? I'll use this just as an example. Let's say I want to make the next level down from this. I start by making a copy of the outside line. Then I scale that line by 10%. I make it 10% bigger. It's the new cut line, and I make the old cut line green so I have it as a reference. Every other layer of my hill has a step on it for my minis, and I make that by pulling in my reference line for the base of the mini, and I just use the direct selection tool to shape the hill out around it. The top layers of the hill have a 2.6-inch light well in them, but that used up too much material. I used a ring approach for the bigger levels and nested every other layer into one another in this fashion. So how do you make a ring instead of one with a 2.6-inch light well? Just get rid of the light well and use the reference line, which you know represents the shape of the level above. And this time make it smaller. I made it 90% or 10% smaller. And this ensures that you've got a big enough ring that you can glue together without any gaps. Next I had to design the crystal, and I wanted to do it in such a way that I could experiment and put different crystals together. I knew how many layers I needed from the exercise I had done earlier. 3 out of 4 of my acrylic colors were 3/16 inch, so that was the main thing I designed for. I put a Celtic knot symbol showing through the circle, and I cut this out of 4 different types of acrylic. I'm only going to show a couple of tips on the laser cutting, and one is how to engrave on 2 sides of one piece. I want to engrave the Celtic knot twice on both sides. We use the cut acrylic as a jig, we flip it over, and we tell the laser to skip the red or the cutting on this pass through. It only redoes the engraving, and as long as your design is symmetrical, it will line up perfectly with the other side. Another tip is that we test everything we can at Tech Shop in any way we can, because if we need to recut something, we need to do it now. My third and final tip is that any of the pieces that are going to be painted, which the hilltops are, We leave the paper on the top as well as the bottom when we do the laser cutting and engraving. Now comes the fun part. I mentioned that we cut the crystal in 4 different colors, and we also cut a jig that would allow us to put the crystal together and test it. See the rubber bands? Here are just some of the variants of about 12 different ones I tested, and the ones I ended up picking was this black with the green in the hole, and this one I didn't even imagine before I tried it, and it ended up being one of my favorites. So that's what experimentation does for you. I think it's a really important part of being creative. Now for assembly. I showed in an earlier video that we use that fusing liquid, and here I am fusing the crystal. It actually took me 10 minutes to fuse a single crystal. I was especially careful because I knew light was going to be shining through it. It actually only takes me 5 minutes to fuse one of the hills. This is the solid green, and I did a second one in transparent green. Just once again building in some experimentation. I also gave myself flexibility on the hilltop. I did 2 different colors of portal, neon red, which looks pink, and neon green. And I also ended up using a solid hill top on the transparent hill so that the light wouldn't show through. Here's the wood, and you can see the steps up. The wood hill has a couple more layers because it's made out of thinner material. And because I had 2 crystals I liked, I decided to go with a place of power for the wood hill. I hand painted the top first before I flocked it. And my decorating strategy was to use the sand to show the beaten path up the hill and around the front of the crystal. And then I had 2 different colors of green grass, so I put the dark green into the indentations where I thought water would be running and around the recesses of the steps, and then I used the lighter green to fill in the rest of the hill. My final step was to use some of these grass tufts that you could get in these packs, and I put a few around the top, and then I put the rest of them where I thought plants would be growing, and that's where the water was running. Here are my final results with some of my minis in place. And once again, I really love this project. It turned out as well as I could hope. It runs off of my remote, which was part of my plan, is to be able to turn all my terrain on and off with a single remote. And I love the way the crystals glow. So while the traditional hill is probably a better fit with the building I showed in my last episode, I do like the stylized look as well, and I just love the lights. I have lots of other laser cutter projects, especially laser cutting for gaming. If you're interested, please subscribe.